In the Pokrovsk direction, the defense forces continue to eliminate Russian personnel and equipment. The military released a video showcasing the precise work of drone operators who turned Russian motorcycles and a tank into scrap metal. Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence showed footage of combat operations in the Zaporizhzhia and Lyman directions. Drone operators destroyed vehicles, fortifications, armored equipment, and personnel of the Russian occupiers. And near Kupiansk, the Ukrainian armed forces struck an enemy ammunition depot. Ukrainian defenders note that in this section of the front, the Russians are using the same tactics as in the Pokrovsk area. Saboteurs are trying to infiltrate the city and hide in the basements of abandoned houses, waiting for the main forces to arrive. But Ukrainian special forces almost daily conduct sweeps on the outskirts of Kupiansk, eliminating such groups.
We can see that Russian tank losses have become much lower. Not because we've gotten worse at shooting, but because they're using them less. Well, with the current capabilities of drones, which basically hunt heavy equipment, and light equipment too, what's left is just small assault groups. There's really no other option here.
Since the start of the day, 76 clashes have been recorded along the entire front line, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In the Lyman sector, the Russians attacked 12 times in the area of 10 different settlements. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russian army tried 5 times to break through the Ukrainian defenses. And in the Novopavlivka area, the defense forces repelled 8 Russian assaults. The Pokrovsk sector of the front remains the hottest spot, with nearly a third of all today's battles taking place there. According to the Defense Ministry, since the beginning of the day, no fighting has been recorded in 4 directions: Kramatorsk, Huliapol, Orakiv, and Pridniprovsk. At the same time, in the Zaporizhzhia region, military experts note increased activity along the line of contact and emphasize that the Russians are not giving up attempts to advance toward the Dnipropetrovsk region.
Here, the fighting is for villages that are already located within the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region. In addition, the situation around Kupiansk has worsened. It should be noted that, for example, around the same most difficult direction, around Pokrovsk, Myrnarad, our troops are managing to carry out counterattacks, especially in Dobropilia and elsewhere. If you look at the map, and this shows that the defense is active, which means it is the most effective type of defense.
920 Russian occupiers were eliminated by Ukraine's defense forces over the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,078,000 soldiers. In addition, the day before, Ukrainian troops destroyed a Russian tank and 45 artillery systems, as well as 200 drones and more than 100 units of Russian automotive equipment.
Alexei Geitzman is ready to join us, military analyst. Alexei, hello.
Hello.
Alexei, at some point on Freedom, we heard an interesting term on air. It sounds a bit rough, but it really captures what's going on: flag sticking. This is when Russian soldiers, without actually taking control of certain territories, just run in, plant their flag, and take pictures with it. Then, all over the Russian media, they spread information claiming they've supposedly captured some settlement. And this practice continues. Here's something interesting. Before, it seemed like some even said they do this just for a vacation photo, though that's not confirmed. But still, if before it was assumed this was only to inspire the domestic audience in Russia, now, in your opinion, how much could this also be an attempt to influence the attitudes and opinions of Ukraine's partners, who are working so diligently on security guarantees?
You see, every war is different from the last, and it's always unexpectedly so. Even when a war begins, any new war, I mean major wars, starts as a continuation of the previous one, and then something happens that turns everything upside down. And, well, it's no coincidence they say, generals are always preparing for the last war. Not because they're stupid, but because, well, who could have guessed in 2022 that drones, which you just had a report about, would play such an important role? It was considered something, well, only half serious. Directly regarding your question, this is war. This is what modern war looks like, the kind we call hybrid. Well, every war has been hybrid. In every war, mass media was used as much as possible, and the informational component was involved, but not as much as now, because social networks and the internet spread information very quickly and to a huge audience. So, if before, say, in World War II, there were loudspeakers or some leaflets being dropped, now, obviously, those had a small effect, but today it has a huge impact. So naturally, this is pressure. But, well, as for putting pressure on us, honestly, you can only laugh at such attempts. But for our partners, this could have certain negative consequences for us. And maybe, well, if there is a reaction, they'll figure it out. Their intelligence services work just fine. They'll find out. They'll check the facts. I mean the people who make decisions, from heads of state to the relevant ministries we cooperate with. But as they say, even if the spoon is found, the aftertaste remains. And the goal of the propaganda campaign and even propaganda sabotage by the Russian Federation isn't to convince people of something that can't be believed, because it simply isn't true. In other words, it's outright lies. They're not trying to convince anyone that they've captured some settlement. They know perfectly well that this can be checked, and that's it. So the question is, are they stupid or something? No, they're not stupid. The goal here is completely different, and often that goal is achieved. The task is to sow doubt. That's the real aim of these campaigns, to plant doubt, at least temporarily, in our people, in our partners, maybe even in ourselves. At the same time, there will immediately be information spread that you're being deceived. Well, we're being deceived. So, you know, television, the media, we're supposedly lying, hiding something from you. But in reality, well, you could take it all the way to the Illuminati and Freemasons. We get that perfectly well. But the goal is to at least temporarily plant doubt, and this goal is often achieved by Russians. It really is. That's why these flag planting stunts are done, so that someone, even if it's just a small percentage of people, starts to doubt. Maybe they really are coming in. Excuse me, please.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Alexei, in that case, I'd like to repeat this question for you as well, because I just asked it to our guest, Mikhailo Podolyak. But still, maybe the topic was different there too, and I understand that. Tell me, I just can't figure it out. Well, today's events. There's also information now that there might be shelling tonight, because preparations are underway. Yes, monitoring groups are saying that flights are being prepared and so on. But that's not even the main question. Today showed that the Russian, and this was clear, yes, I wasn't under any illusions. I understand perfectly well that none of us have had any illusions for a long time, and it was just a matter of time. But today's strikes on energy infrastructure, the fact that both Poltava and Sumy and the regions were without power for many hours today, and that restoration work is still ongoing and so on, showed that the Russian Federation, the methods haven't changed. They probably won't come up with anything new because, well, they realize that this works, at least partially, in some ways. Although it hasn't led to capitulation in 2023, nor in 2022, nor in 2024. But still, as you see it, Alexei, will they keep striking energy facilities in this targeted way so that Ukrainians, for yet another year, yes, autumn is literally just a week away, will end up sitting without electricity again?
Yes, without electricity, without heat. Naturally, it makes sense to attack energy facilities in the fall, at the beginning of winter, so that there are problems with heating. You know that if the pipes freeze and there's no hot water, they can burst. So, in other words, these Russians understand this just as well as we do. And of course, they will try to attack our energy facilities. Well, they haven't started early yet. Usually, it would make sense to do this around October, but unfortunately, we're already practicing for it. And regarding the air raid, you know, I think we've talked about this before, whether or not there will be some kind of missile strike, a massive missile and drone attack on the 24th, on Independence Day. And the Russians no longer carry out massive attacks on dates that are significant for us or for them. Now they do it 2, 3, or even 4 days later. So, out of habit, we expect that, for example, there will be a massive attack on August 24th. We stay on edge on the 25th, the 26th, and then the 27th comes. We end up exhausted from being constantly tense. We kind of relax, and that's when they can strike. This isn't the first time this has happened. It happened at Easter, and on other days too. They take a break for 2 or 3 days, and then a massive attack begins. It's quite possible that, well, if there is intelligence, thanks to our American friends, we understand where this information is coming from. It's not like our own spies or scouts are seeing that a plane is being prepared. It's aerorozvidka, it's satellite intelligence. That's why it's so important for us to cooperate with the United States, at least for this reason. Never mind the weapons, honestly. If we don't know that a strike is being prepared, or that missiles have already launched and are on their way, we simply can't see them. Well, look, our radar station, even the Patriot system, only covers about 150 kilometers. How are we supposed to know that Russian carrier rockets are taking off over the Caspian, or that cruise missiles have been launched? Of course, this also includes long-range reconnaissance aircraft. We picked them up in Sweden, and soon we'll have a couple of those planes ourselves. Those are American AWACS planes flying. Well, it wasn't the Russians who invented them, they copied the AWACS. Well, they tried to copy them. These are long-range reconnaissance planes, satellite reconnaissance. We receive intelligence data about the airspace. When we talk about intelligence data, it's not like some secret documents that some Stirlitz-type character managed to steal. No, it's specifically data about ballistic missile launches, cruise missile launches, the takeoff of a MiG-31 with a Kinzhal missile, and so on. This is extremely important for us. If intelligence warns us that they've refueled, are loading missiles, or are already preparing to launch, usually they launch cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea and ballistic Iskanders from wherever they can. That's a mobile surface-to-air missile system. So it's impossible to say exactly where they'll launch from. Wherever they bring it, that's where they'll launch from.
And let's also discuss the situation near Novogeorgievka. Russian forces are trying to gain a foothold in the villages of Zaporizhzhia and Novogeorgievka, which are in the Dnipropetrovsk region. There are still active battles going on there, and everything that's been said in Russian media, all these claims about the occupation of these territories, it's not true. And regarding the ongoing fighting, Viktor Tryabov, the spokesperson for the Dnipro Operational Strategic Group of Forces, commented on this to Ukrinform. He also clarified that the occupiers are entering in small groups, literally about 8 to 15 people at a time. But in reality, there can be a lot of such groups. For example, at one Russian training ground, they're preparing 170 of these small groups. I think it's not hard to multiply and figure out how many people that could be. How effective is this tactic right now? Is it due to some specific local terrain? Is it really the result of some new strategy by the Russian army? Because this isn't the first time it's happened. There have already been directions where they tried to enter with small groups and achieve something. How effective could this be for the enemy army right now?
They see what we've been discussing, that they've already captured several villages in the Dnipropetrovsk region at the junction of Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Donetsk. Well, that's exactly what we just talked about, to sow doubt. So, if we're talking about this, it means it's so that no one has doubts. If someone is doubting whether they captured it or not. That's exactly what the Russian hybrid, informational, component of hybrid warfare is all about. Regarding new strategies. Well, I have to disappoint you a little. There really aren't any new strategies, in principle, for conducting combat operations on the ground. Practically none. Probably, starting maybe as far back as the Napoleonic Wars. Basically, everything is the same. Only the means, not the methods, but the means of achieving those goals change. There is no other tactic. The tactics are well known, using the terrain, using small groups, large groups. We actually have a kind of genetic memory. Our Cossacks fought in exactly this way. Our ancestors attacked in small groups and harassed large concentrations of enemy forces, and so on. So, there really isn't any new strategy there. They use small infantry assault groups, because using heavy equipment in open terrain, and even in closed terrain, since you can't really drive through the forest, is extremely ineffective right now, since the Russians know these numbers too. 80% of heavy equipment gets destroyed almost immediately as soon as it enters the battlefield. That is, 4 out of 5 tanks get hit right away. They understand this perfectly well. We can see that Russian tank losses have become much lower. Not because we've gotten worse at shooting, but because they use them less now. So, what's left when drones are so capable? They just hunt heavy equipment, and even light vehicles too. What remains is a small assault group. There's no other option here. There's really no new tactic here. The issue is that they're preparing 70 groups. That's a real problem, because we're talking about 3s, 5s, 9s, so there's a certain number. There's a system for how these groups should move and how they should conduct combat operations. It's not just a group that runs somewhere and does something. They move in a pretty clever way. It's not that easy to learn. I'll be honest with you, we used to train in fives too, practicing both retreating and advancing. But listen, does it just seem easy or what? One guy runs, another drops down, another is free to move. So, basically, there are certain signals, certain gestures involved. That's how it is. Honestly, I'll tell you, you can't just pick this up right away. You really need to prepare. And when a group is trained like that, they become hard to hit. If they attack the right way, it'll be tough, really tough, to take them out. When they're not trained, they just run around like sheep. Well, then yeah, it's like the North Koreans. In that case, there's nothing to discuss. They would literally advance in a line, for real. It's not even like World War II, it's more like World War I. So, there aren't really any new tactics. But there's also a downside for those, well, for the Russians in this situation, who use this tactic, making serious advances with small infantry groups deep into enemy territory just isn't possible. It might work on small sections, there might be some probing successes, but then they can get pushed back out. Breaking through the front line, even with as many drones as there are today, still requires vehicles, if not heavy ones, then at least light ones. We saw how they practiced this at Dobropilya, the Russians. It was a one-way ticket. But they managed to advance about 10 kilometers using motorcycles, motorcycle equipment, and IFVs. The only thing is, the front line should have been at least 6 to 8 kilometers wide, not just 1 kilometer. Naturally, they advanced 1 kilometer in width and 10 kilometers in depth. Obviously, the area could be covered by small arms fire from both flanks. It was clear that the Russians couldn't bring anything in there. Those people were doomed to that. It was possible. It was a training exercise. Maybe it will happen in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russians will try to use light, maybe even heavy equipment, because we can clearly see that fuel and lubricants are being actively brought in there. We are destroying them. There, we've already destroyed 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity. Well, that's the estimate, 17%, according to the American Institute for the Study of War. Just take my word for it. We'd like it to be more, but if it's 17, then it's 17. And we're destroying their logistics and trains carrying diesel, gasoline, and other fuels and lubricants. They're moving them south, toward the Zaporizhzhia direction. It's quite possible that they'll try. Well, President Zelensky talked about this, that we see preparations for some kind of offensive action specifically in this direction. And most likely, it'll involve at least light vehicles. I can't predict about heavy equipment. For sure. For sure. Otherwise, why bring in so much gasoline?
Thank you, Alexei, for being with Freedom today. Alexei Hetman was with us.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.